edition of the Experimental Curators Hub, and we're very excited to have all of you here in person today. It makes us reflect back, it makes all of us think about the last time we held the hub in person, which was in 2019, 3 years ago. A lot has changed in those 3 years. The world has transformed, hopefully, and some of the transformation has been our own personal transformations as well. Some of those transformations have been difficult, some of them we've accepted, and some we've now known to live with. Having said that, this hub is really a kind of a punctuation because the world is galloping ahead and we find ourselves once again stuck, or not stuck, maybe once again caught up in the storm of trying to move forward and going ahead, which is a good thing, but also maybe a point the hub possibly gives us a position or a time to create a punctuation, to stop for a little bit, to reflect, to ponder, to ask questions, to accept, but to even rethink of our models, the way we conduct ourselves, the way we imagine we can build our futures, but always to go back to questioning again. So to question and to seek answers is what really is the objective of the hub. I wrote down a few things, and I'm just not going to read out of them, but I'm just going to refer to this paper for once in a while. For those of you who have been to the hub before and know how the hub is going to pan out over the next few days, thank you for coming back, and a very warm welcome back to you. You really appreciate the value of returning to the hub, which is something that builds upon you over the years, and that's great. For those of you who are new and have not come here before, there are many new faces I see. A special welcome to you all. You have really probably, hopefully next 2 days are going to experience something that's going to be a little different, but also something that would be constructive, which is where we want to be. And I also want to acknowledge and recognize and think of all those people who are not here with us today, who were here with us every year of the hub for the last 9 years before the 12th edition we're doing now. We've lost them, but we hold what they say to us at the core of our being, and we remember them for what they've done. So yes, there are people who would be among us, not here. Going ahead, I think we need to take stock of where we stand today. And we constantly feel this overarching need, or this kind of very hostile response these days to ideas of plurality, to ideas of multiplicity, to the very core of what we stand for. The world is a shrinking space for acceptance. I feel it's becoming more singular, more polarized, and we question these polarizations always in our work, but also during these days of the hub. The last thing I want to say is we need to create a sense of fearlessness and intimate conversations where you can speak and we can speak with each other without any restrictions or without any feelings of being oppressed or suppressed. And we hope that the next few days we are able to create that space for friendship and trust and a common ground where we can discuss things that, yes, are of course rooted to exhibition making and thinking of the world, but also about thinking beyond that and thinking beyond these four walls and thinking how what we do impacts what everything else is around us and vice versa. So I wish you all a very constructive few days and feel free to discuss and debate, because this is what the crux of the hub is, and really want you to participate. So please feel free to have your conversations. And yes, and then before I want to thank you all again for coming here, and I'm going to hand this over to Priyanka for the next few words.
Thank you. Thank you, Prateek, and welcome to each one. If you actually, Prateek, you've really said what I thought we'd say, which happens often. We talk for each other. Um, you know, um, the last 2 years, um, we've realized what a huge privilege it is to be in each other's company in person. So, and I know for many of you who've made it here today, it has been a huge effort. So thank you for making that effort, because nothing is easy anymore to just sort of decide and land up somewhere. So thank you for making it. And all of those people who are joining us via live stream, we really feel blessed to have a huge online audience that joins these sessions. In the past years, they've been over 20,000 people who followed this model, and we've been quite grateful to have that support. So thank you for giving us your time. As you were saying, Pratik, the pandemic made us question many models, and internally in Experimenter, for those of you who know us, you know that we work like a collective. We've often asked each other that, does this model even make sense anymore? It's the 12th year of from when we conceptualize the hub. And does it even, is it relevant? Is it crucial? Is it awaited? Is it needed? And we decided to ask ourselves and colleagues outside of our own structure, and seems like ever more so. Ever more so because in many ways we realize that the format even, sort of deliberately or unconsciously has changed so much, including the voice of so many others, and sort of reconstructing of what the hub actually means. Whose voice do we need to hear now? How do we need to think about organizing, restructuring, and making collective action really count? And so I would really urge you to think of this gathering as a possible course of, of thinking about ideas or avenues, of alternate ways of thinking. In this exchange lies the possibility of reapplication. So if there is a way forward in appropriating what is discussed in these 2 days into one's own context, we hope you find all of these exchanges useful. With this, I welcome our speakers from various corners of the world. Adi Dharmaman and members of Ruang Rupa, artists, curators, and artistic directors of Documenta 15, who will be joining us online due to visa and other travel issues. So welcome to all of you. Aki Thami, artist and founder of Sister Library based in Mumbai. Ashok Sukumaran, artist and co-founder of the group and studio Camp, also based in Mumbai. Brooke Garu Andrew, an artist and scholar, artistic director of Nirin and the 22nd Biennale of Sydney. Welcome so much, Brooke. Welcome to the Hub. Hitman Gurung and Chilacha Rajbhandari, curators, co-curators of the Kathmandu Triennale and the Nepal Pavilion at the Venice Biennale 2022. Welcome. Cabela, Malazi, director of the Kunsthal Bern in Switzerland. Welcome. I know it's been a huge effort. Thank you for joining us. Tanzim Wahab, who is not here yet but has just landed. A great adventure, he will tell you about his visit here, but he's made it. Festival director of Chobi Mela in Dhaka. He will be here shortly. Our guest speaker, the fabulous Karuna Nandi, advocate at the Supreme Court of India and the International Human Rights lawyer. She will be also joining us online, and we look forward to our session. Welcome to each one of you. Our deepest gratitude to Natasha. Natasha Ginwala, she doesn't need an introduction, which of course Vidhi later on will present for all of your reference, but Natasha really is a co-thinker, is a colleague whose mind and voice we really, really deeply appreciate and feel very grateful for what she brings to the Hub. Thank you, Natasha. The Hub would not be what it is if you weren't with us on this journey. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank all our partners relentlessly over the years for 12 years in a row. Depending on who we are able to invite, our partners have held hands with us. Australia Council for the Arts, Australian High Commission, Kolkata, the Goethe Institute, Kolkata, Pro Helvetia, Art Review, and Take Magazine. And then, last but not the least, Team Experimenter. Thank you, Josh, Vidhi, Aman, Aditya, Jishnu, Mohor, Shohini, and our entire extended team. We realize as we, the gallery has really grown in its functions. There are many other, responsibilities upon us now, and this team is really, really the backbone of all the work that happens. So thank you, and can we have a round of applause for them, please? Um, as Pratik says, the success of the lab hub really lies in your hands, the audience. This isn't meant to be a monologue of sorts, it's really a dialogue. So please feel free to fearlessly ask questions, engage, and debate, because that is the whole point of this physical gathering. There will be many moments between conversations. Natasha will talk to you about the structure more in detail, that you will be able to have one-on-one interactions. Please make the most of this physical gathering, and I wish you all the best. And can I please request Vidhi to run over the house rules and introduce Natasha?
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Hub. We are so happy to have each and every one of you here today. I'm going to run over the flow of events for the day, which you can also see at the back of the booklets you've been provided when you've come in. So we'll first begin with introduction by Natasha, who will tell you a little bit about the Hub for those who are joining us and introduce the speakers as well. After that, it'll be followed by a presentation by Cabello. After Cabello, we sure. So to share a little bit about the house rules, please do not enter or leave the venue during presentations, as it would disturb the presenter. We will adhere to the schedule with the breaks mentioned in between, and I request everybody to please stick to the clock. Please wait for the breaks before you need to enter or leave the room. All presentations are about 30 minutes in monologue and 30 minutes in dialogue. We request you to save your questions until the end of each presentation. The Hub is designed for in-depth conversations, and we encourage you to participate and ask questions and engage in dialogue. Photography and videography are both permitted, but we request you to refrain from using flash. And we recommend that you bring your own water bottles. We have water provided at the venue, and you can refill your bottles as needed. We request you to please stay until the concluding discussions of the day, and we will conclude the Hub at 5:15 p.m. today. And please keep your mobile phones on silent or switch it off at all times so as not to disturb the presenters during the Hub. And it's my pleasure to introduce Natasha, who is our friend and long-term collaborator. Natasha Ginwala is an associate curator at large at Gropius Bao, Berlin, the artistic director of Columboscope in Sri Lanka, and the 13th Gwangju Biennial with Daphne Ayers. Ginwala has curated Contour Biennial 8 and Polyphonic Words just as his medium, and was part of the curatorial team at Documenta 14 2017. Her other projects include Indigo Waves and Other Stories, Re-Navigating the Afrasian Sea, and Notions of Diaspora with Bonaventure So Beijing Ndikong and Michelangelo Corsaro at Zeitz Mocha. Her survey exhibitions with Bani Abidi, Akinbode Akinbi, and Zanili Muheli at Gropius Bao. Ginwala was a member of the artistic team for the 8th Berlin Biennial for Contemporary Art 2014 and has co-curated the Museum of Rhythm at Taipei Biennial in 2012 and at Museum Zuki Lodz at 2016 and 17. Ginwala has written regularly on contemporary art and visual culture. Her recent co-edited volumes include Stronger Than Bone, Archive Books, and Gwangju Biennial Foundation, and Knights of the Dispossessed Riots Unbound, published by Columbia University Press. Thank you, Natasha, and I hand over the mic to you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Also to those online. It's beautiful to be back and sense this space again. I've sorely missed it, as I have missed the city and its generosity, its hospitality, particularly the way in which Pratik and Priyanka also steer us towards the many complex realities of this city while holding space for us for a little bit of quiet time and nourishment. Let us not take any of this for granted. So really thank you to Team Experimenter for having the right priorities and us in mind. Um, We've been tapping into the curatorial as matrices of thought, ways of coming together and making contemporary culture happen amidst vicissitudes of our times. In the 10th edition of the Hub, we brought back participants of the past decade, some of whom were joining us in this sort of rethinking of their practice. So this is really a space to destabilize some of what we assume about ourselves and our work. Last edition, the 11th edition, we invited curators and their guests, their collaborators. So really also this idea of expanded invitations, a sort of collective resonance of how one ripple produces and senses the next one. And we can talk about that in many ways today as well with Ruang Rupa and others in terms of how they endeavor towards that sharing of invitations. The artist organizer has been a recurrent figure through various editions. This year we are bringing together people who have run festivals, initiatives, platforms, who do academic work, build digital platforms and infrastructures, run itinerant spaces. These have been people on our minds, challenging and opening up models that are intimate but also large-scale forms of cultural production. They've been doing this work over many years with a sense of urgency, but also through the height of pandemic. They have decentered knowledge flows, challenged Eurocentrism, while also challenging well-heeled power grids in this region that we emerge from. They have been thinking about redistribution and what Kropotkin and Catherine Malabou might call mutual aid futures, thinking of reciprocity as a vivid mode of life-making instead of the delimited notion of altruism as it has been theorized. I'm keen to recognize with you the valuable differences between collectivity as resonance in action and formal notions of the collective as has come to be registered in the art worlds we build and inhabit. What are the set of commitments and actual resources we walk with in the present and the approaching horizon? As John Didion reminds us, you have to pick the places you don't walk away from. What are those sites of practice, those reserves and common causes? How might we continue sustaining regenerative models with localized practices that interweave between asymmetries of global circulation without being subsumed or subjugated? In the last edition of the Experimenter Curators Hub, we also addressed the need to bring in voices from beyond the fold of artistic and curatorial trajectories, folks with whom we find an accomplishment and shared values within the folds of a damaged social fabric. We invited journalist Rana Ayub as guest speaker, who reminded us of the fierce women warriors speaking truth to power, amongst whom she counts as one. We quoted from Gauri Lankesh stating, "I will do what I can and I will say what I should. These intolerant voices find strength in our silence. Let us learn to argue using words instead of threats, whatever the cost may be." Later today, we will be in dialogue with Karuna Nandi, as Priyanka has introduced. I also want to recall the words of W.E.B. Du Bois, who stated, "But what shall we say of work where spiritual values and social distinctions enter? Who shall be the artists and who shall be servants in the world to come? Or shall we all be artists and all serve?" I want to raise the spirits and enthusiasm with some music. So before we welcome Cabela Malazi, I'd love us to collectively listen to Roberta Flack singing in 1969, Compared to What? And with that, think about occupying these contrasting realities of revolutionary ferment and clampdowns, declared and hidden wars, stubbornly wanting broken systems to work, but compared to what? What do we do in terms of the kind of values that we want to uphold through distorted times that stretch us, that make us threadbare and convulsing? What do we want to do after this massive isolation? What do we want to do to move beyond possession and the rut? And Roberta Flack encourages us to attempt to make that trial, to make each day count by trying, simply trying, and making those trials as forms of practice. So.
I said I love the lie the love, hanging on with push and shove. Possession is the motivation, hanging up the whole damn nation. Looks like we always end up in a rut, trying to make it real. But compared to what? Slaughterhouse is killing hogs. Twisted children are killing frogs. Poor dumb rednecks rolling logs. Tired old ladies are kissing dogs. And I hate that human love, that stinking mud, trying to make it real. But compared to what? Said the president, he's got his war. Folks don't know just what it's for. No one gives us rhyme or reason. If you have one doubt, they call it treason. I said we're chicken feathers, all without one gut. Try to make it real, but compared to what? Go to church on Sunday, sleep and not trying to duck the wrath of God. Preachers filling us with pride, telling what he thinks is right. But he must be some kind of stupid nut. He tries to make it real, try to make it real, yeah. Try to make it real, real, real. Try to make it real, 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 yeah. Try to make it real, yeah. Real, 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 real. Try to make it real. Try to make it real, yeah. But where's the bee and where's the honey? Where's my God and where's my money? Unreal values, crass distortion. Unwed mothers need abortion, and it kind of brings to mind, oh, young King Tut. He tried. Try to make it real. Said love, the lie, the love, hanging on with push and shove. Possession is the motivation, hanging up the whole damn nation. Looks like we always end up in a run, trying to make it real. But compared to what?
With that, very pleased to welcome Cabela Malazi, a curator and organizer living in Bern, where she has recently become director of Kunsthalle Bern as of April this year. Her ongoing curatorial research project explores the exhibitionary mode as unlikely starting points that place incongruous practices together to instigate other ways of making and reading the world we inhabit. As an organizer, she's preoccupied with the notion of autonomy and the underground. She was the director of Visual Arts Network of South Africa and an associate in the curatorial team at Stevenson Gallery in Cape Town and Johannesburg. She has co-curated the exhibition Deliberation on Discursive Justice with Rux Media Collective for Yokohama Triennale, and we've had Rux present that project as part of the hub, so it'll be great to dig deeper into that of their collaborators, such as Cabela, who also worked with them on an earlier occasion for the exhibition in the open or in stealth at Barcelona's MACBA. Cabela has worked closely with various institutions in South Africa and artists such as Nicholas Lobo, Moshekwa Langa, and Sabelo Mlangani. And we look forward so much to hearing of your work and listening to also continuing this sonic generosity and gifts.
Great. Thank you for the invitation, and I'm really happy to be here. I'm gonna start, or rather have two parts of the presentation. So I'll first do something I call sonic formations. Feedback. And this one is called Sonic Formations, Second Note, Another Sketch. Joshua, can you please play Sister Rosetta's The Strain from Precious Memories?
Precious Memories? No? Lonesome Road? This train? And I'm gonna see how many gonna ride on it. clean train. This train. This train is a clean train. This train. This train is a clean train. Everybody ride it in Jesus' name. This train is a clean train. This train. This train is bound for glory. This train. This train, Brother Spain, is bound for glory. You know this train. This train is bound for glory. Everybody right here got to be holy because this train is a clean train. This train. But this train don't pull no liars. This train, you got to get off. This train don't pull no liars. This train, you know this train don't pull no liars, no false pretenders, and no backbiter because this train is a clean train. This train. You know this train don't pull no wankers. This train, I said this train don't pull no wankers. This train, no. This train don't pull no wankers, no crap shooter, and no whiskey drinkers. It's a clean train. This train. You know this train don't pull no jokers. This train. This train don't pull no jokers. This train. This train don't pull no jokers, no tobacco chewers, and no cigar smokers because this train is a clean train. You know this train. Let's ride the train. This train is on the way to glory. This train. Yeah, this train is on the way to glory. Ooh, this train. You know this train is on the way to glory. Everybody right here, they got to be holy, holy. This train is a clean train. This train.
I was born in 1987 in apartheid South Africa. It is the year that Sister Rosetta Tharp's Precious Memory album was released. She is well known and celebrated in gospel music. However, she has not received as much recognition for being the godmother of rock and roll. If you listen closely to her oeuvre, you can hear a lot of the well-known rock artists who borrowed, or should I say stolen, heavily from her. This form that I'm using is inspired by Dineo Seshewu Pape's short biography. where she puts her birth year in relation to global occurrences. I borrow this form in this presentation and pepper unrelated global events that took place in the year I was born. February 23. CN 1987A, the first naked eye supernova since 1604, was observed. Sakosha Kilerol is Bupape's work that looks at the history of the Polokwane Choral Society, founded in 1977. Both of Bupape's parents were part of the choir as conductor and chorister. Choral music is important in South African history. It's significant as one of the early spaces of anti-colonial and anti-apartheid formations. The Polokwane Choral Society builds on a rich history of community organization held through and by choral music. Andy Warhol died in Manhattan at 6:32 a.m. on February 22nd. According to time zones, he died some 2 hours before my first breath. Charlotte Mahomu Nehemiah Matseke is believed to have been born in 1874 in Petersburg, now Polokwane. She was a South African religious leader, social and political activist, and a formidable fighter of women and black people's rights. As a dedicated churchgoer, Matseke and her sister, Katie, joined the African Jubilee Choir in 1891 and toured England for 2 years. Matseke went on a second tour to the United States of America, where she pursued her studies. She was the first black South African woman to graduate with a university degree. She received a Bachelor of Science from Wilberforce University, Ohio, in 1903, and she was taught under W.E. Du Bois. She was the only woman in the room at the founding meeting of the SANNC, now ANC, on 8 January 1912. July 4th, a court in Lyon sentences Klaus Barbie, a German soldier and Gestapo member, for war crimes committed during World War II. He is sentenced to life imprisonment for crimes against humanity. You can also hear a lot of Aretha Franklin in the vocals of Sister Rosetta Tharpe. Aretha Franklin's Memory Don't You Weep is an itinerant song that has its history linked to the US slave trade. It has been covered by many musicians, among them the Staple Singers, the Caravans, Trinity verse 5, chapter 7, James Brown, Nat King Cole, Bruce Springsteen, and many others. Franklin and Prince are the ones I listen to repeatedly. The first recording of the song is by Fifth Jubilee Singers, dating to 1915. Mary Don't You Weep inspired a Spotify playlist and a text both titled Sonic Formation's First Note, which was published in 2022 by the Van Abbe Museum. February 24th, Whitney Houston wins a Grammy for her song I Wanna Dance with Somebody Who Loves Me. Back to Sister Rosetta Tharpe. She was born in 1915 and passed away in 1973. Please play the next one.
Listen, babe. Tell your sister to don't moan. Pharaoh's army. All of them men got drowned in the sea one day. Yes, they did. Mary, don't weep. Tell Martha not to mourn. Don't mourn, don't mourn. Hey, if I could, if I could, I surely would. I'd stand right up on the rock. Yes, I would. I'd stand right where Moses stood. Yes, I would. Pharaoh's army. I know you know that story of how they got drowned in the sea one day. Oh, yeah. Jesus said, Mary, Mary, don't weep. Don't weep. Tell your sister not to mourn. Don't mourn. We're gonna review the story of two sisters. Called Mary and Martha. They had a brother named Lazarus. One day while Jesus was away,
September 7 to 21, the first conference on artificial life is held at Los Alamos National Laboratory in the United States. Side note, Lagos operates daily on a hum. A constant humming produced by the generators is on average between 60 to 70 decibels. The number of generators possibly increases this number as the generators are a citywide need. Silence or the romantic quiet of the night is not possible in Lagos. Various engine sounds, hooting, and traffic are often read as the pulse of a city. The relentless, constant hum of generators, audible but not too disturbing, adds another layer, tuning the body to a particular frequency, to an unknowable end. You will now listen to a performance on 200 Borindos by Fakir, Zulfikar, and Ala Jurio. On 14 October, Nobel Prize in Physics was jointly awarded to Dr. Johannes George Bednorz and Professor Dr. Carl Alexander Müller for their important breakthrough in the rediscovery of superconductivity in ceramic materials. I will now read a mistranslation of my grandfather's anecdotes. You would hear a sound and know the cows were on their way home. They would make a sound with kitoringo, kwe kwe kwe. The herders would be on top of a makaba, a small cow that you can ride. They would whistle and the cows would know it's time to go home. Each one of us chose a specific type of whistle. You whistled once and they would come to drink water, and you'd whistle again and they would disperse. And the final whistle would have the leader cow show the head the way back home to the kraal. Footnote, I speak Kilobedu, a language in South Africa that is not part of the official languages. And at the time of the mistranslating the anecdote, there was no standard orthography. Now there are efforts to rectify this, still on a small scale, by small non-profit organization and some individual effort. November 22, Max Headroom broadcast signal intrusion. Unknown perpetrators hijacked the signal of WGN-TV for about 20 seconds and WTTW for about 90 seconds and display a video of a man in a Max Headroom mask. February 22, Airbus A320 takeoff for the first time. I will now read a quote by Kodo Eshun that has followed me for the past 2 years, informing and framing my curatorial practice, taking shapes such as exhibition text, playlists, sonic and textual essays, stories, and talks. Sonic Formations is a form and carrier that thinks about itinerant and embodied practice that have been echoing through times. Open quote. Listening to oneself listening, listening to emotions and frictions of emotions. And then one has to decide what those frictions of emotions are. What is the tension they're generating, the rub between them. And then one has to name them, naming the parameters of emotions, because you want to get the modulations of emotion. Listening to the act of your own listening, but also how this bounces back from the other. Most of the time, that's what it's all about, end quote. Thank you. Do we have time for me to or should we just go to the... If you want to, I mean, we can just go into it. We can put up that other image, yeah.
Thanks, Cabela. I'm going to start off the discussion and then we're going to enter dialogue mode. So there will be a mic circulating for you all to add your voices in. I'd like to go back to your time working with Vansa, particularly sort of also the kind of structural challenges that you were seeking to tackle, which also would perhaps create more security for artists, and perhaps the failures of the possibilities within this kind of setup, or where the notion of autonomous learning felt like it was rooted and still a possibility during your work there.
Yeah, Vansa is a very, I think, important space in South Africa, and I think the form of associations is interesting worldwide. Essentially, it was started by artists some while back, maybe more than 10 years ago, and it was artists from all over the country, and the idea was to form a body that would actually do things like lobbying government, and this was because in South Africa, I mean, at the time and still now, there is government funding, but it's not properly getting to the places that it needs to, and also I think visual artists on government level are not as understood and heard as other artists in various disciplines, musicians or actors. And so Vansa was filling that gap on the one hand, and through different directors, each one was kind of like deciding whether it was exhibitions, that was exhibition space, and providing that, or if it was any other kind of gap. And when I was there, I mean, I must say that my time at Vansa was very short. We were working on issues of mental health, and also there was this bill called Artist Rights that we were trying to get to Parliament. And the mental health work was about actually thinking, firstly for artists, this is like trying to get some data, statistics, having professionals study the visual arts and what the mental health issues are. So having a tool that artists can like look at, and also a tool for their families, because often the misconception is that artistic practitioners are eccentric. So one doesn't quite have the range that actually now it's a mental health issue and not just one being eccentric. Or, and also that as practitioners, we must think about the infrastructures that we are building that in some ways would increase the propensity of having a mental health issue. Like residencies, even though they are great, they are also spaces of alienation, and whether when you're moving to a place and when you come back. So there's I guess the entry and re-entry can be spaces of anxiety for artists. So thinking about like different aspects of it. And the other thing was also hoping that these statistics we could then take back to government and say that you are not thinking about visual artists within medical insurance, and this is actually how you think of it. Like, these are the tools, this is the work they do, this is how, like, just giving them some tools is what we were thinking about. So in a sense, that infrastructural work I've taken into curatorial practice. So maybe not in the terms of like lobbying or anything, but thinking about hosting artists differently, or maybe not differently, but being sensitive.
And if we could go into the episode on discursive justice as part of the Yokohama Triennale, I really enjoyed even just reading the conceptual note for it, and particularly in light of the discussion later today with Karuna Nandi, I'm just quoting from that note, which states that tributary draws from the insights of a minor strand in legal theory, which engages with the way people have been able to transform the courtrooms as forums to speak, and have been able to have been making this act of speech itself as the site for claims to justice, and the kind of larger sense of hearings and the polyphonies that surround and move far, far away from sort of legal infrastructures. These are points of interest, of course, within the work that you did, and I also wonder, in terms of what you also just said, in terms of creating access by recognizing some of the slippery ways in which certain notions are defined precisely within also the artistic space. I wonder how this work on discursive justice may also move beyond the Triennale into other facets of practice for you.
I think it has, because I still refer to the materials that we brought together for that practice. And also, I mean, I think maybe a distinction that I'm kind of also drawing is with this, it's about listening and not hearing. And hearing is, for me, about representation, because to be heard, you require somebody to firstly have like an ability to hear you, to understand how you speak. And so, and within this is where I guess maybe also the court is problematic as a colonial institution that is unable to hear, or maybe it refuses to hear other voices, languages, and so that is still there. But I'm also going into the spaces of listening, because that is internal. Not to say that hearing is not internal, but listening is about listening to yourself and the world around you. And so it's not necessarily trying to maybe transmit to another person, but rather like taking something in. I don't know if I'm answering. Just kind of waffling.
You've referred to the writer Bessie Head in one of your interviews. And I'm interested in the way this phenomenal author engaged with practices like community gardening as a critical act to tackle land politics, segregation, and racialized violence. She's also noted, a discipline I have observed is an attitude of love and reverence to people. And so in relationship to apartheid South Africa, but also her own exile, her own exit, that has since then also been such an important form of witnessing this figure through other artistic practices. More recently, in South Africa, it'd be great to kind of listen, to you speak about those, perhaps.
I think Bessie Head is, of course, a phenomenal writer, and I was saying earlier to you that we studied her in high school. And so, in a sense, she's part of our thinking, but what I was interested in was her practice on gardening. And that was me trying to think about like forms of practice that don't have to always go into the exhibitionary. So like what nurtures you, what you do, but I mean, of course you show it, you have a garden, but not to try and take that practice into the exhibition by bringing in plants in and be like, I'm gardening, you know? So I'm trying to think about those forms of practice, like how do we deal with dinners and gardening and all of these host of practices that are happening around us without always trying to force everything into an exhibition. So like, what bridge or how do we tackle them? So for me, I'm trying to draw that out. I don't know how, but that's where I'm thinking about Bessie Head's practice as maybe the people that were in the community were not thinking about her as this phenomenal writer, but actually this person that they are in constant conversation with around plants and more. You know? And also thinking about like the philosophy of life, not as something that, or maybe not the philosophy of life, but rather that philosophy doesn't have to be something that happens in a particular space. It can happen while gardening. So, but I don't have a form yet. This is, she's just orbiting. She's in my head, inspiring this kind of thinking. Yeah.
We're going to open up. So just like, yeah, please make yourselves known for any questions or thoughts. I'll keep going till you do that. So, as a cultural organizer, how do you envision your role at the Kunsthalle Bern, given that it speaks to a very specific strand of exhibition history, and also its role in the artistic landscape of Switzerland today? In 2020 and 2021, more than 60 Black artists and cultural workers based in Switzerland signed a critical open letter to art spaces in Switzerland with a statement, the need for a deeper confrontation with structural blind spots rooted in white supremacy and resulting in anti-Blackness. It's a demand, a call for recognition perhaps, but also it's you entering this space with your own history, and that is also perhaps, I mean, I'd imagine something heavy to take on in a new context. Mm-hmm. So I wonder, you know, in the spirit of that friendship and recollection that nourishes you, how do you intend to take on that responsibility, not only with exhibitions, but, you know, as you say, with your process?
I'm not going to take on the responsibility. Firstly, not because I'm being facetious or anything, but rather that to take on the responsibility, I would have to understand that. And I mean, I've been there 5-6 months, never lived in Switzerland. Besides the obvious things like banking and chocolate and Nestle, I don't know much about it. And so to take on the responsibility would be a kind of like window dressing or like something that is not sincere. So that's what I mean, that I won't take it on. But I hope that in my being there, there can be a dialogue around, I guess I'm calling it inheritance. And the inheritance within exhibition making, within directorships, inheriting accounting, Excel spreadsheets, cleaning, you know, we inherit a lot. We just walk into a space and then they say, we clean this way and you accept it. Or this is how we drop a budget and you accept it. So I'm hoping to maybe like think even about those small little things, like those things that we inherit, and see if those inheritance actually are the problematic things, if those don't perpetuate a way of exhibition making that's exclusionary. Because it's not just, like for me, holding space for an artistic work has to be even with the small thing of, or maybe not so small, cleaning and, I mean, maybe the budgets are a bit big, but cleaning as well, like food culture, and like how people host, how they welcome, and all of these things. And the other thing that I'm like holding dear is the Saharan dust storms. The Saharan dust storm comes from an ancient lake. Scientists don't really know when it started. It was a lake which dried up, and probably was a climate catastrophe at the time. But this dust storm has been going on yearly for many, many decades. And it's literally, I think, why we are still breathing, because it feeds the Amazon. But the other thing interesting for me is that it's non-binary. So it's not that it's only good. It also is toxic. It's also old. It's also current. So it does a whole lot in terms of like my thinking around practice, which is not, also it's not human scale, so it's not 100 years, it's beyond that, it's thousands, it's probably even billions of years. So I'm trying to kind of like, not use it as a theme, but rather as a way of thinking, as a way of inhabiting space. So it's probably going to be like nourishing me beyond Constantly directorship, this way of thinking. So that's, yeah.
Yeah, I can send the mic there. Ashok, maybe the one behind then Ashok. Or if the mic is easy to be extended out. You could introduce yourself.
Hello. The mic is on. Can you hear me? This is Roy, Debuyuti Roy. Myself is an artist. So my question would be like from the point of view of an artist, of course. And I think that curators are more important because, not more important, they are equally important because artists are more emotional. And the bridge between them to the practical world is curators, I think. So that's the biggest bridge that you people are building between the artist and the practical world. But if I go back to the history, like if you, I'll take you back to 100 years back, like when Henri Matisse created, or Monet created that painting of sunset, and that was like thrown out of the French Biennale, I think, because it was not selected at that time. Because artists, the genius artists, always having a propensity, like curiosity or some sort of activity, like they do the things somewhere it is ahead of time. When the genius artists are doing the work. So like if you talk about Picasso, if you talk about Matisse, if you talk about the Dada, movement Dada, which happened, if you talk about the work by Jackson Pollock even, you know, at that point of time, that artist was not picked up by the curators of that time. So do you think that this is the biggest challenge for a curator to pick somebody from the artist group who is thinking ahead of time? So what do you think about this?
You get his question?
How to pick an artist who's ahead of time?
Or maybe be like.
I mean, yeah, I guess it would be great for Cabela to answer this one, but
anybody of you can answer. It's just a curiosity because
artists being, I guess, is it you're also sort of thinking about artists who've been rejected from certain kinds of international systems,
Yep.
from exhibitions, and this later realization that they have been ahead of their times, and what it means for a curator to perhaps sense into that.
I mean, yeah, it's a bit difficult, no? But I think maybe I would say personally, I don't know if I have that foresight, It would be great if I had it. But at the moment, I would say my challenge is to actually write for practices that are not canonized. So maybe not in the kind of like this is like this future person is happening, but right now there are artists who are not canonized, and curators and art historians are not the most risk-taking humans. So often we need others who've actually said something, you know, like formidable for us to take. So I would say it's to write for those practices, but also in writing for those practices not to use forms of validations that are exclusionary, right? So, which is hard, because the very thing that validates also has like those residues of violence. So how do you kind of write for that without, like without recreating the very thing that you're trying to subvert? So that's the challenge. And so in a sense, when I'm writing exhibition text, I'm trying with all my might not to use the art historical muscle of like referencing, whether it's Picasso, who is problematic, but if you just put Picasso's name, nobody will question you, right? But he's problematic on very many levels. But it's also easy to use Picasso. So then it's like the hard road of writing without relying on those easy validations. So that's that's what I'm doing, and this is why like trying to understand Bessie's practice without bringing it in as an exhibition is something I'm trying to think about, because there are these many practices, right? Like all over the world. People are practicing this way. People are thinking about life and philosophy in these ways. So how does that, how do we write about that without having to first put it in the exhibition and be like, this gardener is also thinking about, and not, but within this space, I can now write about them. Can I write about them while wherever they are? So I don't know if I'm making sense to you, but this is what I'm trying to do.
Ashok?
Yeah, just to say it was exciting to begin with song. And then I had this response, which I was sort of sharing with Aki, that, and this is not a really theoretical problem, but I was longing for the lyric video in both your, right? So I'm saying that, so what do you think, like, if we are talking about a song that has words, and you're playing it for, say, an audience like this, where does reading, or in this case, just following lyrics of Aretha Franklin in Los Angeles in 1972, help me to not alienate myself from some of this, because there's some thin thread of English that connects us in this room to her spirit. So I'm just wondering what you think about lyric videos in this context. Listening and reading together, if that ever came up in as a curatorial problem or in your social life.
Yeah. I think I did mention that I speak this language that is not official. So in a sense, and English is not my first language, it's my third. So mistranslation is a space I inhabit. And what I found generative about the sonic, even though there are words, is that it also goes or can go beyond words, or let me say understanding and relying on words. Because even if you can read, there is the propensity of misunderstanding and many misses. And for me, that's not a problem to like stay in the kind of like those cracks or like of misunderstanding, because I think the song can operate beyond that kind of understanding. And so that's for me where the sonic, it's more an embodied listening than a kind of, I don't want to say the brain is not part of the body, but you know what I mean, like the mind, because when you're reading, it's now another level of trying to understand, where when it's embodied, it's the mind and the other senses, and we don't always, we can't always articulate what we're feeling. So for me, performance and sonic art actually poses that challenge of you can't always articulate what you've just felt, but you felt something.
It was more like a karaoke sort of question than
Okay.
fully embodied.
Thank you. This is great. I was just I'm very curious about how you found like the private sector, like in Stevenson Gallery, and you know, really you call yourself an organizer as well as a curator. I mean, your presentation has very much been about being a creative, an artist, the way you think, your kind of the music you played, the way you talk about language. I mean, you're very free within that creative expression, which is fresh and it's great and it's not hierarchical and it doesn't buy into the kind of complexity of the kind of European broken system of artist genius. Obviously, that's what we're here to kind of not talk about as well. But I'm very curious about the decisions or your own pathway of weaving into like the private sector, then out of the private sector, and all of a sudden landing in Switzerland. And here we are in Calcutta. And so, yeah, I'm very kind of curious about how you navigate those spaces.
It's kind of like been a sort of meandering work or life. So I studied BCom marketing, family, and I'm happy to keep telling the world this because it embarrasses my family, but they didn't believe the arts, I could make a living from the arts. So they forced me to study something, which was BCom marketing. And I left BCom, like when I finished my undergrad, I then thought I was interested in art, and thankfully I'm not an artist. So I then thought, what can I do? And then curating came up, and I went the slow route into it because I wasn't sure. And then I needed to make money, and then I looked for a job. And in South Africa, the way things are, commercial galleries are probably where you can find a job. And I found a job at Stevenson. And it was a very great time. I mean, I got to travel, met a lot of artists, met a lot of curators, had an understanding from a commercial gallery perspective of all of these institutions. But when I was there are not so many. I mean, now there are a little bit more galleries than when I was working in the galleries. There are lots of artists who don't have space to show. And the gallery also shouldn't and can't absorb everyone. And so then working at the galleries became something that I couldn't do anymore because there were all these other practices. I also thought that young artists shouldn't be showing so early on in their career, or maybe not showing, but being represented by galleries too early. And so I then started thinking I need to go and see how else. And so I left to study, to do my master's on independent spaces. And autonomy was, of course, an utopian idea. So like, how does one foster autonomy? Are the institutions, the artist-run spaces, autonomous? How and when do they lose autonomy? Like, what is the friction around that? There was also like in Africa especially, like the local government is bad. So often it is that, the local government comes with censorship and all of these things, but then you're getting money from foreign governments. So then it was also this tension of, one glorifies one government versus another government. And I mean, there's a very, I think, incredible text in Raw Materials book, which I forget what it's called, Condition Report. One of the Goethe directors boldly, and I love that she was bold, writes that Africa has inexhaustible resources, and and she's pitting Europe against China, and so they have to stay in Africa, right? So my master's was actually trying to think about these structures that are there that we have to access in order to experiment, to think about what we are doing, or to actually have resources to do what we want to do, and that tension. So that's how I kind of moved into artist-run spaces. And as luck would have it, when I was finishing my master's, the job for Vanza came up. And somebody was like, would you like to apply? I was like, never thought about it, sure. So I applied, I got the job, and so then I got an even wider understanding of the art world, which I wasn't seeing when I was at the commercial gallery, which was very incredible, actually. Practices that are embedded within the local, practices that are really thinking about this inheritance of, what I was saying about Excel spreadsheets, accounting, formalization, constantly questioning these. And also getting a network to practitioners from all over the world. And then, again, this job came up and somebody said, why don't you apply? And I was like, never thought of Switzerland, but why not? And here we are. So it wasn't I didn't have a master plan. I didn't have 10 years from now, I will start here, and I just moved, yeah.
One last question, then we have to run back. Yeah, Sharon. You introduce yourselves.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. It was so enlightening. Even though I'm not an artist, I'm a writer, but I think that there's a lot of similar things that I think about and we think about. And the thing with writers is that we live and work in isolation, so it's super nice to not be shut up in my room. My name is Sharanya, sorry. So I had a question. I loved what you said about hearing and there being established formats for kind of the people that we are programmed to hear everywhere in the world. As a writer, I face this when I write, but I think about who I hear when I reference or who I'm inspired by. So I was wondering if you had any, what are some of the modes that we can contest these, who we choose to hear, who we choose to give legitimacy. And I also see in my work, for example, if I write a nonfiction story about agricultural agency, and if I kind of if I quote a farmer, oftentimes editors will say, oh, but ask an expert, as if the person working the land is not an expert. Just because people are not attuned to hearing, thinking about certain people in this subcontinent with legitimacy, I think we really have a long way to go. So I was wondering if you had any kind of, in your life, in your work, if you've come across ways to kind of contest who we are, how we do, and I think I'd be glad to know.
I mean, it's a little bit difficult. One, at the moment, I'm trying not to use bios. And the use of bios is, for me, so maybe let me say with, I think Massimiliano Gianni's Venice biennial, I don't remember which year, but it was called something encyclopedic something. And he was, he included practitioners that were not artists. which is great. But the bio was then, for me, the space of contention, because the artists were born somewhere, they studied, they had a wonderful professional life. The practitioners that are not formalized artists went to primary school. They had children, so their very personal life came into that space. And so then there was a clear hierarchy on who is professional and who is, So I've had this question of, if you are going to include people who are not supposed experts, supposed professionals, it's not a question of time that they've spent thinking about something, no? It's what is the validation and what modes of validation do we use? I don't have an answer. At the moment, I just don't use bios. I use people's names. And this is to just also, because I don't know yet how to write in a way that would validate enough these practices that we are trying to insert into this, I guess, colonial system. Let's not even call it anything but colonial system, because the validation is colonial, no? So now I'm just using people's names. If any, I'm the validation because I currently have the job. I'm the stamp. Let's see how long that lasts. But I'm sorry, I don't have more of when you find it, share it with me. I also need it.
There is one more question, but I would request, it's also a way of keeping you in the room with us. We're going to have tomorrow a closing discussion, and that's a very important moment also to bring back, to do the memory work. So keep your questions and connect it to other participants as well, because that's something that we really welcome, so that we have questions for each individual, but then we also think a little bit through the day of how they might connect to each other and how they may also radically differ from each other. And so in closing, Cabela, I wanted to also mention the work of Chimurenga by way of a publication of theirs called Home is Where the Music Is by Uhuru Falafala, because I think it recalls an important perspective when you talked about the biography, and we've spoken about certain figures, but the way that she comes into conversation with certain jazz musicians and poets, while also writing the matriarchive is the crate we dig to know and define ourselves away from Western eyes. The matriarchive inspires Fred Moten to proclaim Black culture is in many ways a maternal culture. It is a maternal insurgency. And I really love this idea of a matriarchive because it really also troubles and destabilizes certain kinds of hierarchies. We were speaking in the car about how so many elements of our daily lives are not designed for women's bodies and other types of gender diverse bodies. And so I do think that within this form of recognition and also thinking beyond the human timeline, how do we want to perhaps acknowledge also this kind of archive?
I thank you for that reference. Uhuru Palafala is great. She also is thinking about writing and beyond, I guess, kind of like written form, thinking about hip hop and spoken word. I guess spoken word is a bit more formal, but thinking about hip hop as well and performance and many other mediums. And she's thinking about orality, or she writes about orality as itself a text. And I think the work that she's doing is really incredible, also because she's an academic. I can easily just use her name to validate the things that I'm doing. So thank you for that. Yeah, she's somebody that thinking about and around also. Because also the work that she's doing, even though I guess in South Africa specifically, most of the jazz musicians are men, she's also thinking about what they're drawing from, and they're often drawing from women's work. And so in a way, she's writing those women into the practices that we are all kind of like consuming a lot, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
for
you
starting
so
us
much.
off. There's no break. We're just going into the next next presentation. Okay, with these, we're going to introduce two practitioners, collaborators, partners in life. Shalesha Rajbandari comes from Kathmandu and is a visual artist, cultural organizer, and co-founder of the artist collective Art Tree Nepal. Her longitudinal research repositions quotidian and plural narratives by weaving folktales, oral histories, and performative rituals as a juxtaposition to conventional historiography. Rajbandari's practice is rooted in the experiences of women and seeks to confront how female agency and corporeality become contested political sites for contemporary nation states. A phenomenon that parallels the dismantling of matricentric landscapes in extractive societies. Her installation work was part of the traveling exhibition, A Beast, a God, and a Line, that was presented at Parasite, TS1 in Yangon, Museum of Modern Art Warsaw, Kunsthalle Trondheim, and various other sites. This exhibition was curated by Cosmin Kostinas, who has also been with us at the Hub, and in fact also was working closely with Shalesha and Hitman on the Kathmandu Triennale. So it's quite interesting how that relationship moves from curating into artistic and curatorial collaboration. She has further exhibited her work in the Museum of Arts and Design in New York, in the Welt Museum in Vienna, the Serendipity Arts Festival in Goa, and various other places. With Hitman Gurung, Shalesha has curated the Nepal Pavilion at the Venice Biennale of this year, and their exhibition from the Kathmandu Triennale is still sort of feels very much in the air. It was recently at Berlin, Savvy Contemporary this summer, so the work is somehow still continuing and deeply inspiring. They have also together worked on 12 Baisak post-earthquake community art project. Hitman Mangurung was born in Lamjung and is currently based in Kathmandu. His diverse media works are concerned with some of the most pressing political, economic, and cultural phenomena transforming Nepal's physical and societal landscapes, particularly addressing the country's decade-long people's war, several years of unstable governments, and the impact of all of this that has had on personal and professional lives of Nepali citizens. In parallel, his work also speaks to the strong impact of global capitalism, the dramatic economic boom in the Middle East and Southeast Asia, an unprecedented investment in infrastructure development within the region, but also the way that that produces certain demands for cheap labor. What that then means for mass migration is all reflected in Hitman's artistic work, but also within the close collaborative thinking that they do as part of Art Tree Nepal, and through that, bringing these conversations into the region. So also just to kind of mention, we have been needing, of course, to remain self-critical of what it means to do the Experimenter Curators Hub in Kolkata. Okay, at least it's not in Delhi, but in Kolkata still, in India, what it means to build and sustain regional conversations. This is something that we are remaining very alert to, and how that conversation precedes certain kinds of market demands where artists' work is brought in, but sometimes, and many times, unfortunately, they are not brought in as equal conversation partners, as organizers, as those who are actually the ones offering these practices to us and retraining our vocabularies. So I want to acknowledge that, and thank you so much for making it, being with us. I know it's not easy to enter this this country, and we're very happy to be hosting you.
Thank you. It's working.
Whoever has the other mic.
So thank you, Natasha, Pratik, Priyanka, and the experimental team for the invitation. It's an honor to share this platform with amazing people. Some of them we know from long time, but some are new. So there might be expectation of we're going to talk about Kathmandu Triennale and Nepal Pavilion, but it's slightly different. Like we're going to share our research practice and also how we incorporate those practices in our curatorial practice. So it will be like a brief information.
Video.
Video, yeah. Second slide.
We can have to like press in the middle.
No, you go back to videos. Second slide. No.
Yeah, there's a separate file as well.
Yeah. Can you go to the video file? The last one. Yeah, last one.
अरे मैना हमार जसिन संतान हुक्रा रगड बहाई भीरलरी मैना बरगिए लडाईमा अस्तही जो रहत्री मैना.
Maina is a seasonal song from Tharu indigenous communities, song post-monsoon season when people go deep in the forest to harvest grass. When individuals felt lonely in the forest, they would sing a Maina for warmth and chorus. This song of pain and strength was adapted to contextualize the struggles of indigenous people who fought in the People's Liberation Army by cultural branch of Maoist revolution.
Now let's go to the slide. Yeah. Sorry for this.
Many women had joined the Maoist revolution with the hope to end the Brahminical patriarchal structure. And in many ways, this woman's contributions did change the power dynamic of caste and gender.
Next, please. So, Nepal has went through lots of political changes in a very short time. So, created in the immediate aftermath of 2001 Royal Massacre, this poignant series by Shashi Bikram Saha daringly captured a time when turbulence percolated throughout Nepal's society. From the People's War unfolding in the rural hinterlands to the murder of the royal family in the capital's Naranhiti Palace, the artist nimbly incorporates newspaper clippings of obituaries with textual and iconographical references to Nepal's Hindu's past. Ultimately, the resistance ignited by Dalit indigenous minorities farmers' rebels, topples down the nearly 3-century-old colonial monarchy.
And meanwhile, this is what we were being taught at art schools. Dead white men objectifying women's bodies and appropriating indigenous black and minority arts, philosophy, and cultures.
We realized that we didn't belong to this narrative of totalizing claims of monocultural nation states, of Eurocentric canons and vocabularies. We never felt like we belonged to these institutions, which embrace the same colonial ethnographic gauge in which our people's ancestral knowledge is categorized as a primitive, tribal, craft, backwards, folk, traditional, and not contemporary.
I guess this was the time when we were studying this, we were forced to meet to study this and idealize this. A group of friends from diverse indigenous communities came together with the sense of alienation and disbelongingness, and we kind of bonded together, and that bonding was through dramas. We came together and named our collective Art Nepal.
In 2013. So our whole process after that became like a learning and unlearning process. Yeah, that one.
तर आप उपलब्धि हुईटी हुईटी फे 20 में दलाल हुकर घाट कई के घाटा कर दिए कह परल जस्ता जौन परिवर्तन हमार सोचल जसिन परिवर्तन नहीं हुई से हमार नेपाल में.
There were dissatisfaction. In 2006, the People's War ended with the peace process, but many promises remained unkept. Women were pushed back to the kitchen and to the same traditional gender roles, while many of their male counterparts could enjoy their public and political engagement, and it was, of course, socially accepted. Many intercaste marriages, which was a radical move during the people's movement, later on ended up with forced divorces, and the same fate happened to inter-ethnic marriages. Yes. Slide.
So, in 2006, the People's War ended with the peace process, but many promises remained unkept. Women were put, I read it. Many PLA were forced to retire as volunteers due to being unqualified during the verification process and were removed from the cantonment under an agreement with unnamed personnel, the Nepali government and the party. So this is a performance I did reflecting on how these ex-PLA are now forced to join this labor migration in Middle East and Malaysia. So, yeah, you can read the text. A person had joined the People's Liberation Army with dreams and hopes that the revolution will bring change to problematic social, cultural, and economical system. This sky, these houses made of mud, stone wood, orange and white clay are all still the same. Only that person is missing, and his dreams have disappeared along with the sweat in the heat of the deserts. Yeah. So, Nagendra Gurung is one of the Nepali migrant workers working in Saudi Arabia. So, we invite him to present his photographs capturing his working side and the daily life he going through. So we presented in Kathmandu Terminal in a way like when you would see the images in an iPhone, because these were all taken by him in his phone. Next.
While the decade-long intergenerational people's movement fundamentally altered Nepal's politics and society, many oppressive structures still survive, and the struggle live on the movement that are led by women and indigenous group. in this image, Tharu women organized march and rallied a public demonstration against the right to land and to end the exploitative labor condition. So these are taken by Indu Tharu. She's an activist, a journalist, researcher, and like very fierce fighter. So you can see that women there are wearing their indigenous attires, and the attire itself became a symbol of protest and reclamation of Tharu identity. It became synonymous to the power of indigenous people. So we're actually going to have an election in few days in Nepal, and Indu ji actually is running as a candidate. And you can see the election symbol is dakiya, this ancient weaving technique of basketry, and we really hope she wins because this is extremely important historical movement for the visibility and power of indigenous people.
It's ready. Yeah. The third one. Yeah.
Dalit communities throughout subcontinent and in this region have preserved and passed down knowledge about the performative arts, including many other forms of art through generations, yet their contributions to cultural, artistic, and revolutionary elements in history are often overlooked. As an organization led by Dalit activists, Karnali Art Center has experimented with vernacular, performative, and material mediums to reappropriate and reorient art to focus on Dalit voices and lived realities. Such experimentations include readaptation of Bharata and oral tradition from the Karnali region, where performance sings and dance carrying a two-headed drum known as hudke. Traditionally, it was used for to perform episodes from Mahabharata, folk texts, etc. But compositions by Karnali Art Center satirically and politically and poetically address the persistence of discrimination faced by Dalit. Bharata were always led by men, by the way, and this performance in Kathmandu Triennale was the first time ever in the history that it was performed by all women, and they were criticizing patriarchy in Karnali.
So here you see the image of Muluki Ain. The Muluki Ain of 1854 was a legal code introduced during the rule of Prime Minister Janga Bahadur Rana. It serves as the foundation for Nepal's modern legal system. The code systematically legitimized discrimination on the basis of caste and cemented a Hindu-centric irrationality. Centered to this discrimination, there has also been active resistance from Dalit and indigenous communities for thousands of years. In recent memory, the democracy movement of 1948 threw out the Ranas from power, but struggles concerning language, identity, and land still persist.
So, same. So the example of such activism from this time can be seen in Sukrara Sastri's work with the Nepal Bhasa movement. Nepal Bhasa is derogatorily also commonly known as Nevari Bhasa. His book Nepal Bhasa Vyakaran, which is one of the first book where the language from the manuscript was kind of standardized and was a grammatical overview of the language, of the Neva people pictured here. And actually it was published in Kolkata in 1928. Such publication and language movement as a whole were supported by the Neva trading community who have been mobile from thousands of years, especially in the Trans-Himalayan trade route, and later on in Lhasa, Kalimpong, and Kolkata. Sukraraj Sastri was actually hanged to his death in Kathmandu in 1941 by Ralna rulers for his activism and democracy movements, and the place where he was hanged is like 8 minutes away from the home I was born in.
Yeah, this video. Yeah. So in 1948.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we had a democracy movement in Nepal, but after 7 years in 1961, so they came to power. So the ideology of Panchayat system, nationality ideology of one country, one language, one religion, one race, aggressively through education, art in all forms, more, like strategically display lots of indigenous languages and the systems and culture art. So this is work by Nek Limbu, reflecting on that colonial. Slide.
Yeah, so suppression from the government and ostracization of from the society in terms of the language is actually still ongoing, and these are recent examples where these are the banners that Art in Nepal friends, we did the banner, and it was actually an acknowledgement to the June 1999's Basa Andolan. So yeah, I mean, from the language to land, everything was being nationalized, especially after King Mahendra's time, in a very sort of strategic way, in the name of modernization, and all the diverse languages, aesthetics, philosophies were monolithicized under the compulsory rule of one language, one dress, one nationality, and one everything. These are goruas, and goruas are terracotta sculptures which serves to link various ancestral clans of Dangaura Tharu community, making indigenous territories, ancestral forest, farm, and liminal spaces. And this is Lapkan Chaudhary's work he's from Tharu community himself, where he's trying to understand why, how is it possible that most of the indigenous communities don't have their land. And then he's also trying to understand the relationship between nature, animal, and humans, and the introduction of trophy hunting, which is very reverse to how indigenous community were coexisting in the forest and the liminal spaces, where of course conflict happened. But then it was not for pleasure. Animals were sacred.
Next.
Also, some of the example of artists Revati Mandal and Selu Yadav. Selu is from Avadi community and Revati ji is a Dalit artist, but both of them reside in a Mithila region where they're portraying tiger, again, two tigers playing with a tattoo, the tattoo on the hand, Tilanga.
So after 1960s, Nepal was open to the world. So lots of development projects and the tourist attractions projects were introduced. But it was strategically, like all these conservation protection lands were strategically in the area of indigenous community, and lots of indigenous peoples were displaced because of the project. And if you see that how this preservation project like national parks or conservation project like national parks have become like a touristic center now, but most of the hotel resorts are owned by the outsiders. So it's actually not benefiting financially even to the local communities. And all these resources were
Resources were stopped.
They were not allowed to use those resources because of it's all controlled by the army.
The people were not allowed to enter their own territories, their own sacred lands, and it's all restricted, and it is actually used for, in the monarchy's time, were used for display of power, like British governments were invited for hunting and for pleasure, and now for used for touristic purposes, and everything is actually happening in the name of conservation.
Next.
Video.
Katrina. Yeah.
Come and get it, come and get it, with Peter Russell Clark. In the city or the outback, he's Australia's brightest spark. Come and get it, come and get it, good food you love to eat. Come and get it, come and get it, and there's people you can meet. Cook a shark or make a damper, feed your ego, pack a hamper, on a farm or out at sea. Learn a recipe or three. Come and get it with Peter Russell Clark.
This is a clip from Katrina Chewa's 3-channel video. It's from the centerpiece, center video, and she's been extensively researching on her own and trying to understand her own ancestral land and how it has been ripped apart in the name of industrialization and mass agriculture. So her place is at Republic of Kiribati in Pacific Ocean, Banaba Island. And Banaba Island is actually one of the extreme example of extraction and colonial extraction actually from New Zealand and Australia. To the point that the landscape itself is unrecognizable and the entire community has been displaced and now living in places like Fiji and other Pacific islands.
So this is work by Joydev Rosa from Chittagong, Bangladesh. So it was also part of the Kathmandu Triennale, and the artists are representing or commenting on his area being or his community being militarized, terrorized by the militarizations.
Yeah, and he's from Tripura indigenous community, and then the work is also about dreaming the possibility or imagining, is it even possible to, in this point of life, that the generations have been militarized, that is it even now possible to think about a time when indigenous people are free in their own lands? And drawing that imagination and throwing out, husking the military out of their zones. This poster is by Suvasthebe Limbu. And as you can see how he's trying to portray, so I'll just read it. You see the boundaries and walls you have created runs through our communities and lands. So basically these areas and where Kolkata is, which is in West Bengal, many indigenous communities reside here. So according to the West Bengal Tribal Development Department, Government of West Bengal, in their website they states that there are 40 ethnic groups so far, and then in India they say scheduled tribes. But as we discussed with our indigenous feminist friend Akuthami, many indigenous communities are not even acknowledged, are not even in the list. Yeah. And it's further more marginalized from even the discussion itself. Again, the same website states that describes Limbu indigenous community, which is spread across what is now India, Nepal, Bhutan, parts of Tibet, like all these areas. Myanmar, Thailand. And now all these countries comes, like Subhas Tebe says, comes across the indigenous territories and where multiple indigenous territories. And then same website, the government website, the Tribal Development Department, Government of West Bengal states, Limbu are courageous, hardworking, and open-minded. At the same time, they are carefree, emotional, and laid back.
Next, not there all the same.
We're coming to the end of today's presentation, and we're trying to imagine how the future might look like to the marginalized communities who carries traumas in their bodies, the intergenerational traumas. Here is a screen grab of Mihela's work, video, where she uses myths and old spells of Roma witches, which are then updated and merged with the poetry of contemporary anti-racist discourse and slogans. Can we imagine a future where the witches' spell are used as technologies of healing mechanism? We want to imagine a future, imagining and building a future where the pens of our ancestors are healed, where songs of our shamans still reverberates, where multiple cosmologies are celebrated, where our people are free from oppression and can live with dignity. We want to end this talk with a video by Make Limbu. Sorry?
It's a video.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for bringing so many contextual resources along the way in presenting your work. I'm also wondering, in terms of just perhaps to go a little bit more into the ways in which you individually also make time for your own artistic research and practice, together with so much of the collective work that involves bringing together so many different kinds of cultural producers into formats of viewing, whether that is an exhibition or a festival or a performance. I'm just thinking about all the artists in the room as well, those who are also teachers of art. This kind of taking on of a multiplicity of roles is not easy by any means. And so it would be great to understand just, when you also retreat into those spaces where you sit with your own art making, and when it is that you open up spaces, how do you sort of work that out between the two of you?
I mean, from the early on, when we showed how the art education is, and when they were presenting the idea of master artist working in a studio, and that is the only way of art production. And from that point itself, it was like, maybe we were younger, we couldn't figure out exactly what was wrong with this, but it was like, it doesn't kind of fit in with what I feel inside. From the very, because we were in the same art university, and we used to do, from a young age, student time itself, as long as we remember, we have been collaboratively working, and collectivity was something maybe we inherited from our indigenous ancestors, where individual self is, and the collective and the community is always like together. It's not separate, and it's one.
Yeah, and also it's mostly in Nepal. It's very much like it's a small community, and it's very much centered in on the capital, Kathmandu. And even in the global discourse, Nepali arts or contemporary art even doesn't exist. Even in the subcontinent, it's very less discourse and exchange and collaborations happening. So for us, it's always we want to decentralize, or like go out of the comfort zone, that small comfort zone, and try to understand our more possibilities and like diversities, and open the doors to more possible collaborations and exchange. So it's not easy, like because it's very difficult financially, and also there are lots of multiple stakeholders, politics going on while you're working with communities. So I think it's kind of learning process for us, continuous learning process for us, and all. That's why all our projects or research, it's always like continuing. We don't know when it will stop. So it's a process of, even the Kathmandu Triennale, like for us, it's kind of continuity of our own practices. We don't see it like separately as a curatorial intervention.
Thanks. It would be great to also spend a bit more time thinking through the Kathmandu Triennale that you realized together with Cosmo and Costinas, and also the pavilion in Venice, the ways that these kinds of models structure or restructure that relationship between local and global, what it means to, in a way, manifest them differently, perhaps also challenging certain conditions that are given, to sort of query and question and make other entryways. Also, though, what it means to then rescale from that economy back into sort of art tri Nepal. And because sometimes I feel we think about the scaling up, but then what about the rescaling and moving back into one's own group ethics, group aesthetics, with the limits of that? How do we sort of think about not only that moment of what is going on internationally, but then the aftermath, what the sort of ways are to redistribute that visibility and power as well?
I think the binary of local and international, the definition of it itself is actually expanding and diversifying a lot. Even if we compare this discussion like 10 years ago, it was a different kind of, it was a different world back then. it was very different, like the level of invisibility and absence of dialogue. And there was either discussion on race, or continents. And within that continent, obviously the first world country of that continent would only get representations, or countries with certain GDP would have visibility. But I think now there is more warmth and actually there are a lot of examples. This is happening right now. I would like to acknowledge events like Avocado, let's say, where, of course, Venice is a very, it has its own power structures and colonial legacies, and one can't go beyond nation state. And it is where indigenous people like what is happening. Or territories like Hong Kong or Taiwan, they're not official pavilions. But the way Sami Pavilion, acknowledgement, the way they functioned, and the way Avocado was able to transcend beyond the nation's boundaries. This was not happening 10 years ago in this scale.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in the sense of international and local, maybe the kind of conversation we were having locally in the village of Lomjung, in the village of Bordia was exactly happening in the platform of Venice. And we could relate to each other. It was happening in Venezuela and the forest, Amazon forest. It was happening to Sami people, and we could, it was this new kinship,
or solidarity.
Solidarity. And I would say there are pockets of international, but we love that translocal. And I mean, of course, I feel the crisis is inevitable, but at least we are together and holding hands.
I'm looking out for questions. But I'll continue with one more for now. Just thinking about the kind of living traditions or material practices, ancestral ways of making. There's so many ways that we need to sort of reframe these terms. The way that these fault lines have been created in the taxonomy of art making and living with art really has led to these infrastructures that are ailing, such as ethnographic and colonial collections of a certain kind that have managed to spread with such ferocity in so many corners of the world, also in our parts of the world. So thinking about those, but then also knowing that these practices continue to emerge as breath emerges. It's sort of part of the practice of orality and of inheritance. Cabela mentioned inheritances as well. These are also inheritances. I'm wondering, because you have a space now and that you're working from, how you want to think about, let's not say the archive maybe, but just safekeeping perhaps, or continuity of those practices. And do you think about perhaps storage or kind of ruin and destruction the same way that a museum would? Perhaps is it sometimes okay that things also just kind of fall apart and disintegrate?
Yeah, completely. So it's like even I always not feel comfortable speaking in English because it's my third language, and I was forced to study in Nepali and speak in Nepali from my school. So that's also, there is a saying like if you want to colonize, then first you start from culture and language. So that's how we were always manipulated or forced to accept the systems. That's not exactly very much relevant to our realities. But acknowledging the realities like for artery, it was actually started as a movement. But we have to give a name like collective, all this, like balance with this international vocabularies of contemporary practice. And it's always like very challenging to sustain because we sometimes doesn't fit in this commercial art markets system or this power dynamic. But also it's open up for us to many collaboration with like lots of thinkers, activists, writers, artists, even farmers, like dress designer. So I think it gave us the more possibility to understand things that are very much connected to our realities or our history. Or, no? You wanna add?
Yeah, and then yes, like in terms of your comment that we totally agree that not everything has to be documented, not everything has to be preserved, archived, exhibited. In many of the works we do, talking with the stakeholder and understanding what is the energy from them is very important. If it's not from our own community also, if it's from our own community also, we have to talk with the leaders and activists, and we actually ended up not showing many things because it's not important.
Or it doesn't have to be public, or it doesn't have to be part of exhibitions. Because some are, it's a very personal, like you experience it, you share it, then you just keep it with you until you die. It doesn't need to be like sensationalized or presented in a very professional manner in a gallery or museum or Biennale, Triennale.
Building relationship, understanding, building kinship, which lasts longer than a temporary exhibition is more important than.
I just remember, I forgot your name. Yesterday we were talking and, sorry, what's the name? Ranjit. Ranjit was in Kathmandu actually a week before the earthquake happened. So he had this memory captured in images in different sites of Kathmandu. But he shared yesterday with me like he doesn't want to share that because all those sites were collapsed or damaged or gone. And I think, but you kept that memory with you. No? So I think it's many things are like that for us. Like even some are very sensitive issues, like when we were working with the peoples who were involved in the People's War. So even lots of people are disappeared. No? Lots of people are still facing the cases, legal cases. So yeah. Sorry.
I want to ask on behalf of someone online. I don't know if you can hear me, but I can talk very loud. So this question is from Sabi Ahmed, who is with Ishara Foundation in Dubai. I think he's watching from afar, so hi Sabi. The question was for Cabela, but I think it could be totally asked right now. Shilisha and Hitman, Cabela, if you want to pitch in at the time. Should we ask that question?
Sure, and we'll take the rest of the online questions in the general discussion as well, but you can ask this one if you want.
What does the art world signify to you in your practice? I ask this because there is generally a lot of generalized conflation and cynicism of the art world and the diversity of artistic and life practices. I know that the two meet, but I feel your work regarding practices that push/probe the art world without going into the canonical modes of institutional critique. It could hold true for both their conversations. So,
I mean, it's originally for her,
so
so
maybe she can respond.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, I also think that it also holds true for your presentation. Yeah, I mean, I think of course, the documenta this year kind of showed that without being cynical. So I think now we have probably even a bigger map on how to hold those, or rather a world of practices, or host a world of practices without the cynicism and without relying on a particular mode of exhibition making. So I think it's now possible, or not necessarily now possible, but we have a way of explaining what we've been doing without feeling like we are not quite contemporary art with a capital C.
You want a response?
It's this, yeah, the conflict we constantly feel. There is a standardization and acceptable understanding of art world, where certain vocabulary, if you can speak certain vocabulary, speak certain language, and present in certain way, then that is the intellectual art world. Or there, but the reality is there are multiple cosmologies and visual like artistic visuals, audio, performative expressions, which roots from it. And until unless we are not fluid enough, open enough, like the conflict will keep on coming forever. And for each of us also checking our own privileges and self-accountability, and how, like she was saying, like how do we inherit things unconsciously, sometimes consciously, and present certain worldview, and what kind of stance we take, and why are we doing. I mean, it's all about reflecting.
Other questions? We have time for one more. There's one there, if you can pass the mic. If it's easy for you to walk up, then everyone can see you. If you like to.
Hi, my name is Ray. I have a two-parter question. Firstly, I wanted to know, when you mentioned that in your country the conservation places are systematically eradicated, I wanted to ask you, do you feel the government does not get what conservation is, or is it a facade to hide their greed? It is a two-parter question. I will, because I can relate it to my background, that's why I am asking, like, what do you feel in this? Like, is it planned? Is it, or they just don't get what it means to preserve?
So, I think this whole concept of conservation and preservation or this national park idea came from the guilt of trophy hunting, because if you see, then the King of England is the one of the like main pattern for like initiating this idea of national park. In Nepal, it was actually adopted version of American national park systems, which actually doesn't like make sense in terms of Nepal, because for Nepal it's not just protecting the animals or resources, but these areas were also very important sites for these indigenous communities, those who were actually protecting the resources and the territories from long time, no? Because before this idea of conservation came. But when the implement of national park happened, it restricted local people to use the resources, because they were created a buffer zone and it was completely militarized, controlled by military, and people were not allowed to use the resources from the forest. And the relationship between people, land, forest, waters is very important in indigenous community. It's not just tangible but also intangible, because these sites were sacred for them. Did you get it?
Yes, so I wanted to say, like when I am looking back in my background and in the similar areas, so we are mostly farmers, and in our villages certain resources were stifled, certain rivers were made to dry up, and so the pipeline was only to get some education from the villages by going to another place and then eventually coming into a bigger city and be assimilated with the other population.
Which area are you from?
I am from coastal Midnapur. So,
Can you tell me the area?
coastal Midnapur. So, over time, like in about 60 to 80 years, the population of my village has stayed the same. People has come out, but people could not return. The system doesn't change. Like whatever we can farm, it is for the community. And what I can see, the practices of arts is actually dying, because when there are people, it's a completely collective work. If somebody sings, if somebody draws, if somebody dances, other people in the village take up their responsibility, their family's responsibility, their kids' responsibility. That is something when I come to the city, I do not see.
Yeah.
And here, what I want to ask, that reclaiming land, reclaiming places, and reclaiming larger places, so where we can practice this collective practice of art, is it possible? Because I asked this and I said it is a two-parter, because if the people who are doing this, if they don't understand it, we can start a conversation, we can make them understand. But if it is a systematic oppression, then we can't. So that's why I asked.
So, like, for example, if we talk about Chitwan National Park, which is the central southern part of Nepal, it's one of the largest national parks. So, actually, lots of Tharo communities, Bote, Musahar communities were forcefully displaced from the territory, and hectares of lands were now part of national park, and they were moved to another area. But at the same time, national park also became like a tourism project for government. So it's like earning a revenue from the tourism. So those areas became like a touristic center. Like people go there, enjoy sighting animals and things like that. And also the appropriation of culture started to entertain the tourist. No? And for young kids now, the performance they do to entertain the tourists become like their cultural practice, which is actually not. Did you get it? Like, it's very appropriate. Like a stick dance, which were not part of the cultural dance. It introduced later to entertain the tourists. No? So lots of things. It's not a culture-friendly project or culture.
It's destroying it's destroying the sacred lands. It's destroying the sacred performance and rituals.
And also why I bring this relationship of herbs and the shamanistic practice. Now it's almost dying. Very few shamans have a knowledge of using diverse different types of herbs that were sourced from the forest. And also we had a talk with the local communities, like maybe now it's in honor of UNESCO World WWF, funded by WWF. So we're talking we had a conversation with community to approach cultural heritage, not just of conservation of the animals or the forest, but also acknowledging the cultural side, intangible side of that territories.
But that sort of ownership will come eventually. I would like to give an example of a performative ritual of calling ancestor in Gurung, his community, and it's called Charkha Nach, and where people have power to call in the energy, spirit of ancestor after they dies, and then guide them to the ancestral world from this world. And what was happening was, since you're talking about the systematic oppression, the upper caste rulers were using the Charkha, the situation made such that the Charkha Nach became a form of entertainment because there's music and singing going on.
During the melas or festivals, local melas, touristic melas.
And to the point that the community themselves, of course, were performing it for multiple reasons. Maybe one of the reasons was also they have been invisibilized in such a manner that any kind of visibility is important. But now what's happening is, and it's coming from the community themselves, that there's a reclamation act happening, and then people are realizing this is not an entertainment in Mela. And then people, young people, old people, collectively, are coming together, and they actually have stopped the entire thing in Mela. So they do it, and they teach it to the younger generation, to clubs, but acknowledging and respecting its roots.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Also for your question. We're going to break for lunch. So have a good meal, and then we're going to be back at 2 o'clock for a show. Sorry, for Ruang Rupa. For Ruang Rupa. Yeah, thank you.